Welcome everyone, my name is Maria Passon and I am an Associate Lecturer at Murdoch University. I come from a teaching background and is part of the Education Department. My main focus is instructional learning and assessment. Today I want to use this opportunity to talk to you about the importance of instruction in tertiary education. Before we start, I just want to make an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge that the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation is the traditional custodians of the country and the waters that Murdoch University stands on. We pay our respects to the Noongar elders, both past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their wisdom and advice and teaching in our cultural knowledge activities. So what we'll be looking at today, we'll be looking at the lenses of understanding instruction, clarification of instructional methods, and how to achieve instructional intelligence. Starting with understanding instruction, first we need to ask ourselves, what is instruction? When we talk about instruction, we often talk about learning activities, strategies, methods, tactics, and approaches. In my work with teachers and postgrad students, I've found that we don't always share common language about instruction because we use different terminologies to often describe the same things. This stems from the fact that it is not something teachers and tertiary educators are necessarily explicitly taught. Now, instruction is informed by lots of different approaches and theories. My aim today is to provide you with a framework that will help you to make informed decisions on the instructional method you would like to use within your classroom, as well as a way to help you to articulate to colleagues and managers the reason behind your instructional choice. So to start off with, we'll look at the research done by Petty. He talks about science of instruction that needs to be informed by effect size. Now, what is effect size? Effect size, if we look at the graph, is basically just the qualifying difference between the outcomes of different instructional methods. If you need or want a little bit more information about this, then please feel free to go to the YouTube clip. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I just want to reiterate that effect size is important. Petty, together with other researchers, have defined size important, and that their conclusion is that different instructional methods provide different outcomes. The next bit of research that I'm going to look at is that of Nathan and Bastrino. They talk about the expert blind spot. When we look at the expert blind spot, we find that they said that instruction needs to be learned and planned and not just be something that you pick up along the way haphazardly. The expert blind spot is a really interesting concept, as the research tells us that enthusiasm, passion, and expert knowledge does not equal effective teaching. What we learn once we get into the classroom is that in order to help students learn, we need to take into account consideration not just the content, but also the diversity of our students. So the expert blind spot define contact knowledge, what we know about a subject as the nouns, and pedagogical instructional knowledge, what we know about teaching the content to others as the verbs. Looking a little bit further to Sprague and Stewart's research on the mastery learning module, we find that they talk about unconscious incompetence all the way up to unconscious competence. Now, what does this mean for us? I'd like to use the analogy of riding a bike for the first time. If you get on the bike for the first time and you have never ridden a bike, you will fall into the unconscious incompetent because you don't know what skills you need in order to ride the bike. So unconscious incompetence means that you don't know what you don't know. As you go along and you start trying to ride the bike, you find, okay, there's quite a few skills that I need to learn in order to ride a bike. I need to be able to balance, to use the pedals, steer, use the brakes, ring the bells, take my environment into account. All those skills, although still lacking, are now in the forefront of stuff that you need to learn in order to ride the bike. That will make you consciously incompetent. As time goes by, you get some practice in, you become fluid with your writing. This is when you come into the conscious competent stage, where you are aware of your surroundings and you're fluid in the motions and you know you have the knowledge. After some more time has passed, you become so familiar with riding the bike that you become an expert in it, and riding becomes automatic and natural to you. And that is when you move into the unconscious competent state. Now, most of us, when we walk into a classroom, falls into the unconscious competent state. But the problem is we teach to those who are coming into our classrooms, never learned about the subject matter, and they fall into the unconscious incompetent state. So in order to bridge the gap, we need to use a range of instructional methods. Now, another researcher that we came across, pay a lot of attention to, is Bennett. Bennett talks about the art and science of instruction. He says what defines teachers is their ability to integrate an extensive understanding of how students learn and an instructional repertoire that allows them to respond meaningfully to what they know about how and what students must learn. And that is instructional intelligence, thinking wisely about instructional choices. Bennett tried to classify and categorize instruction to help us make these choices, and this mind map gives us an idea of how Bennett classifies instruction. So if you look at the mind map, you'll see there's different arms or branches. The first branch is instructional organizers. Now, instructional organizers is a body of theories and knowledge that tell us about the diversity of students, brain research, learning disabilities, multiple intelligences, ethnic and gender diversities, learning styles. These knowledge and theories will underpin some of the choices you make, although it is not something that you actually implement into your classroom. The next one is instructional concepts. Now, instructional concepts, much like instructional organizers, are often concepts, theories, and ideas that we don't actually implement in our classrooms. However, it is things that we use to help us with the instructional choices we make. Things like individual accountability, public versus private fear, fear of failure, covert to overt, and then Bloom's taxonomy are all things that we take into account when we make our choices. Next up is instructional skills. These are the skills all teachers know or need to implement. We know these things, but we also need to make provision for them within our classes, like wait time, framing questions, checking for understanding, linking past experiences to the content, providing models, and our response to the learners or students. Next up, we have the instructional strategies. Now, instructional strategies tend to be complex and they often take time to learn. They have research behind them, and there's a number of steps that we need to take into account when we implement them in our classroom. So, for instance, if we were to look at Jigsaw, which is an Elliott Arison strategy, it has a number of steps that I have to take into account before I use it in my classroom. I have to decide how I will group students, what materials I will prepare for each group. I need to set up the classroom and manage the class, provide correct and explicit guidelines for students, and then run students through these steps prior to asking them to actually use the strategy. So with most instructional strategies, you have to teach the students how to use the strategy before you can expect them to effectively use it. It takes time to develop the skills to become unconsciously competent in using these strategies successfully. Then we come to the instructional tactics. Instructional tactics, on the other hand, is quick, simple, and easy to use. Although they don't always have a research base behind them, they are very effective. I might do a think, pay, share in my classroom, and it only takes me 2 to 3 minutes, but it will help the students to interact with the content. The main focus is that you need to plan your questions to provide maximum engagement, and this goes for all of these tactics. So within the workshop, you might have an instructional strategy and a couple of instructional tactics that will complement one another. And that is when we come to the power of size and effective use. So we need to be aware of the effective use so that we can be aware of what happens when we start to stack and integrate a number of different tactics and strategies in our classroom. What is the effect size of the individual instructional method, which could be either a strategy or a tactic, and how are they likely to impact students' learning when I stack them together? So this is an example of how Bennett suggests we become instructional intelligent. This is a manifestation of something that I would do in the classroom when I make my instructional choices. So let's take Think, Pair, Share. I might decide to use a Think, Pair, Share in my classroom. This is simply involves posing of a question to students, provide them with time to think about their responses, then share their response with a partner before calling on the students to share it with the class. This is a very quick and simple to use. However, the reasoning behind my choice of using this tactic, opposed to just asking questions to the whole class in general, is as follows. So when I choose Think, Pair, Share, it reduces fear of failure. Many students don't want to speak up in class, and when randomly selected, because of their fear of public failure or humiliation. If I have the opportunity to think about my answer, discuss it with another person before I have to speak up, I am more likely to do so. It also allows students to go covert. We know that when we allow students the time to think before answer, we have more likelihood of getting extended responses. And this links in with our brain research that tells us that when students feel put on the spot, the brain freezes so that the prefrontal cortex, the center of learning memory, gets hijacked by the limbic system and the body goes in fight or flight response. And once that happens, the student can't formulate a sense of response that we need them. So in order to engage students, we need to provide a safe learning environment. This then also links to the multiple intelligence theory, because I know when I use Think, Pair, Share, I engage students in a number of different intelligences. So the thinking part of the Think, Pair, Share connects with the intrapersonal intelligence, where for students who like to think for themselves. It also links to the linguistical intelligence for students who like to write things down to make the connections. The pair part links to the interpersonal intelligence for students to share the ideas verbally with others. And the share part of the tactics link then to different learning styles. So it links to students that learn orally or through audio, because they can have the verbal communication, but also they can listen to others communicate ideas. In using Think, Pair, Share, I'm accommodating a number of learning perspectives and styles within my class. I also know that when I use Think, Pair, Share, I will have to carefully think about Bloom's taxonomy, so that I can determine beforehand the level of thinking I want students to do before responding. This also directly links into framing questions, as I need to plan for and use the correct verb when framing questions to elicit the expected responses. This further links in with wait time, since we know that providing the wait time, we increase the quality of the response, and research shows us that 7 to 8 seconds wait time is required. This then links in to checking for understanding and our responding to learners. How do I respond when a student's response is wrong? How do I respond to a correct answer? In both cases, while still keeping them motivated and engaged. Think, Bear, Share also increases the individual accountability. As I increase the chances that all students in the class will be engaged and therefore individually accountable and on task. Alternatively, you have only the extroverts or the more knowledgeable students volunteering the answers all the time, whilst the rest of the class is not held accountable. I could now choose to integrate Think, Bear, Share with other tactics such as placemat, graffiti, or other strategies such as jigsaw or any other cooperative learning strategies. When stacking these instructional strategies and tactics together, we have to think about the effective size and the use of the instructional methods so that we can stack them together, allowing them to get the best outcomes for our students. I hope this overview of the importance of the role of instruction in education will provide you with a starting point of how to become aware of your own practice and open to change. To end our discussion, I have a few questions that you might need to think about if you think about your own practice and you think about how you will employ instructional strategies in your classroom going forward. If you do want to find out more about instruction, there is a practical instructional methods unit that is running in the September trimester, which is aimed at all teachers, tutors, trainers, and lecturers. Best wishes. Thank you.